Forget the image of the hunched old woman over a cauldron. That is a Hollywood lie concealing the truth. The primary targets of the witch hunts were not unsightly hermits, but women who held power, wealthy widows who inherited their husbands' businesses, and midwives whose medical knowledge gave them real influence in the community. As many as 80% of all those accused of witchcraft in Europe from the 15th to the 17th century were women. This was not a hunt. It was targeted gender-based terror. Their economic independence undermined male control. Their obstetric knowledge competed with church doctrine. The accusation of witchcraft became the perfect tool to seize their resources and eliminate the threat. If the devil wasn't the issue, what were the real economic motives driving the Inquisition? This was not a struggle against heresy, but a systemic war for control. And we will show you its blueprints. This raises two irresolvable questions. First, how could clergymen who had taken vows of mercy personally design instruments of sadistic torture? How was the Pear of Anguish created when the commandment states, "Thou shalt not kill"? This is a fundamental theological contradiction. The second question, where did the Church acquire an entire technological arsenal for extracting confessions? Secular courts of the same period managed without such a sophisticated cruelty. What kind of system was this? This system operated like a steam boiler without a release valve. Officially, it was meant to purify souls. In reality, it accumulated so much pressure from fear that an explosion became inevitable. The answer to the first question will be found in our analysis of the Pear of Anguish. The answer to the second in our analysis of the Hammer of Witches. We begin to dismantle this machine right now. The Inquisition was not the chaotic cruelty of a dark past. It was a systemic mechanism, a machine of oppression. We will dissect it and reveal its 7 key instruments, from the psychological weapons that broke the will even before torture, to the mechanical devices that destroyed the body with surgical precision, and finally, the ideological text that turned murder into a legal norm. This blueprint is universal. Its elements, in one form or another, are still used for manipulation and control today. We are moving from theory to evidence. Here is the map of our investigation. Our investigation will cover 3 key points. First mark. In 2 minutes, we will reveal the Inquisition's most almost underestimated weapon, the masks of shame. Public humiliation was the foundation of the entire system, and we will show how it prepared the victim for physical torture. Second mark. In 8 minutes, we will analyze the design of the Pear of Anguish. This instrument was created specifically to punish women, and its mechanism reflects the deep-seated fears of the Inquisitors. Third mark. In 15 minutes, we will get to the operating system of the entire machine, the book The Hammer of Witches. We will expose how a single text legally justified mass murder, turning superstition into law. In 2 minutes, it will become clear why psychological violence was the first and perhaps the main weapon of the Inquisition. With racks and pincers in their arsenal, Inquisitors still spent resources creating seemingly harmless masks of shame. They caused no physical pain. Why was this theater of humiliation more important than the torture itself? At first glance, the mask is simply a tool for public branding. A woman was paraded through the streets, exposed to the ridicule of the crowd. But its real purpose was deeper. The mask transformed a person, a neighbor, a healer, into a faceless object, a symbol of sin. This was a psychological mechanism that prepared the executioner for violence. After all, it is easier to torture an object than a person. This process is like soil erosion. The mask washed away the top layer, reputation, and social connections. Only then, after leaving the individual defenseless, did the Inquisition move on to destroying the body. Imagine a respected midwife. She has helped deliver dozens of children in her village. How do you make these same people believe she is an accomplice of the devil? She is brought out to the square. An inquisitor reads the accusations. They place an ugly iron mask on her. The crowd, which just yesterday sought her help, now throws clumps of dirt at her. For her, this is not just humiliation. It is a total betrayal. Her world collapses. The faces of the neighbors she trusted are distorted with hatred. She realizes she is utterly alone. After this, her social identity is destroyed. In this state of psychological vacuum, she was led to a room where instruments intended for the body awaited. But the masks were not all the same. Their design was another layer of psychological warfare. Was there a standard for all witches? No. The Inquisition developed an entire nomenclature of humiliation. A mask with a long metal tongue was intended to punish scolding women. A mask with a pig's snout was for those accused of uncleanliness. It seems the punishment fits the crime, but each design targeted a specific gender stereotype. The long tongue was an attack on female speech, the pig's snout on the female body. This was not just an attribute of punishment, but an effective propaganda poster. It didn't just punish one woman, it programmed the minds of hundreds of onlookers, reinforcing the link between femininity and vice. The Inquisition needed a tool that was guaranteed to break any will. So, the spirit is broken. But how do you force the body to betray the mind and offer a confession? The masks of shame destroyed social status and severed ties with the world. This was the preparation of the battlefield. But what if the victim, even when morally broken, possessed an unyielding will and a high pain threshold? Psychological pressure was not enough. The Inquisition needed a tool that would work without fail, one that would bypass the will and appeal directly to the nervous system. And they created it, an entire arsenal of mechanisms that crushed bones and made the body scream. The next stage of our investigation, the technology of absolute pain. We begin with the Spanish boot. How do you control agony so that the victim doesn't die from shock and has time to confess? The Spanish boot, instrument number 2 in the arsenal, looks like a primitive vice for the shin, often with internal spikes. Its principle seems simple. The screw is tightened, the vice compresses, and the bones are crushed. Brute force. But this is an illusion. The key element was a screw with a fine thread. It allowed the inquisitor not just to crush, but to dose out the pressure with surgical precision. Each turn of the screw was a non-verbal question. Torture became a dialogue, where the victim was kept on the verge of losing consciousness for hours. Just 3 full turns would shatter the tibia into fragments. The goal was not death, but continuous pain that hacked the mind through the body. But what if torture used not a mechanism, but the victim's own body weight? How did a simple wooden pyramid become one of the most devastating psychological instruments? This is the Judas cradle. The victim was suspended over its sharp point. It seems the essence is simply to lower them onto it, but the reality was more sophisticated. They were lowered slowly until the point merely touched the groin area. Now they had a choice: relax their muscles and be impaled, or tense their entire body to the point of spasms to avoid it. It's like trying to balance on the tip of a knife. Any relaxation, and you fall onto the blade. Any tension, and your muscles burn with fire. The inquisitor created a situation where the victim's own body became her greatest enemy. The device shifted the responsibility for the pain onto her. She became an accomplice in her own torture. But there was an instrument for agony that could last for days. Why did inquisitors so persistently target women's legs and groin areas? There is a pragmatic explanation. These zones are sensitive, but damaging them does not lead to a quick death, allowing for a prolonged interrogation. A purely technical calculation. But behind it lay an ideology. For a woman of that era, her legs meant mobility, the ability to work. To cripple her legs was to strip her of independence. Torture in the pelvic region was not just about pain. It was a humiliating act of invasion, symbolically punishing sinful female sexuality. The Hammer of Witches, a treatise published in 1487, explicitly called female sexuality the devil's gateway. The choice of target was an ideological act. But what if the torture needed to last for days to obtain complex denunciations of others? The Spanish boot and the Judas cradle created peak pain for quick confessions. But the Inquisition needed more. Not just "I am a witch," but detailed testimony, the names of accomplices, descriptions of Sabbaths. For this, the victim had to remain conscious and able to speak, while experiencing enough pain to fantasize at the investigator's direction. How could you torture a person just by sitting them down, stretching the torment over dozens of hours? They created the perfect solution, the witch's chair. A chair studded with hundreds of spikes, on which the victim had to spend hours in agony while maintaining clarity of mind. It was a conveyor belt for producing false testimony, and it set off chain reactions of accusations that destroyed entire villages. How could a simple chair studded with spikes be more effective than the rack? This is instrument number 3 in the arsenal, the witch's chair. A massive iron armchair, its back, seat, and armrests covered with hundreds of short spikes. Restraints for the arms and legs made any movement impossible. At first glance, it's just an extremely uncomfortable seat, but the numbers destroy this illusion. Between 500 and 1,500 spikes were calculated with engineering precision, short enough not to pierce vital organs, but sharp enough for each of the hundreds of points of contact to cause acute pain. To this, they added heating the chair from below. The victim had no position free from agony. This instrument induced a state of total sensory overload. The brain, attacked by a continuous stream of pain signals, lost its ability to think. The only way out was submission. But what did this look like in practice? The accused is seated on the chair. She swears her innocence. The inquisitor monotonously, hour after hour, asks the same questions about the names of accomplices. The first few hours are pain, shock, and denial. But after 10, 20, 40 hours without sleep or water, reality blurs. Interrogation records show that some sessions lasted for days without a break. In this state, the brain becomes a sponge. Names whispered by the interrogator turn into false memories. Agreement becomes the only way to get a sip of water. This is precisely how records filled with the names of innocent people were born. The witch's chair was not an instrument of torture, but a conveyor belt for fabricating evidence. But there was an instrument created specifically to punish female sins. Now, stop for a second. Imagine you haven't slept for 40 hours. Every square inch of your body is burning with pain. You cannot move without intensifying it. Your mouth is dry, and every word is a struggle. And in this moment, the inquisitor offers you a deal, one sip of water, and an end to the torture. In return, you just have to name one person, anyone. The neighbor you dislike, the woman you envy. Be honest with yourself. What would you do? We have seen instruments for humiliating the spirit and for extracting testimony from the body. The witch's chair was a pragmatic conveyor belt for producing denunciations that expanded the witch hunts. However, the Inquisition's arsenal contained instruments devoid of this pragmatism. Their purpose was not information, but ritual punishment and intimidation. They were aimed at what the ideologues of the Inquisition considered the root of evil: female speech, female sexuality, female nature. And for this, a special symbolic device was created. It did not just maim, it invaded the body in the most humiliating way. This is the Pear of Anguish, the material embodiment of misogyny. This small, fruit-shaped metal object was an instrument of irreversible mutilation, instrument number 4 in the arsenal. It consisted of several metal segments that, when closed, were inserted into the mouth, vagina, or anus. The inquisitor would then turn a screw at the end of the device. The petals would slowly but inexorably expand inside the body with monstrous force, tearing internal organs. The process was irreversible. This was not an interrogation. It was a punitive execution. Its function was not to break the will, but to physically destroy the part of the body considered the source of sin. For what sins was such a punishment prescribed? Formally, the list was clear. The pear was used in the mouth to punish female blasphemers or gossips. It was used in the vagina for those accused of adultery or performing abortions. But all these crimes, female speech and female sexuality, were spheres the church was trying to bring under total control. To an inquisitor, a sinful woman was like a leaking vessel, and he took the crudest tool to forcibly plug the source of the problem, the mouth or the womb. The Pear of Anguish is ideology cast in metal. It directly answers the question of how priests could create sadistic instruments. They believed they were not destroying a person, but sin itself in its physical manifestation. This is why this intimate torture was often conducted not in a dungeon, but in the town square. The woman was tied to a post. The inquisitor, like the director of a horror theater, would display the instrument to the crowd and read the accusations. This was not an act of justice, but a bloody performance asserting male power. It evoked not sympathy from the audience, but ritualistic satisfaction. The torture of one woman became a lesson for hundreds of others. Survivors were left permanently maimed, serving as living, silent reminders of the consequences of disobedience. It was the most effective form of social propaganda. The Pear of Anguish was the peak of physical and symbolic sadism. But such mechanical methods had a drawback. They left marks and could lead to premature death. The Inquisition required a method that was formally a light torture, shed no blood, but was guaranteed to break the will by attacking basic instincts. They found the perfect solution in the simplest of elements. A torture that created a complete and inescapable illusion of drowning, forcing the victim's brain to shut down, will and reason, in a desperate fight for a single breath. This is water torture, the pinnacle of psychological manipulation. How did water, a symbol of life and purification, become one of the most foolproof instruments in the Inquisition's arsenal? This is instrument number 5. The victim was restrained on their back, often with their head tilted downward. A cloth was placed over their face, and water was slowly poured onto it. It seems like a mere imitation of drowning, unpleasant, but not fatal. But the brain does not distinguish this simulation from reality. The water passing through the cloth triggers an involuntary spasm of the larynx. To the primal parts of the brain, the signal is unequivocal: death by suffocation in seconds. This hacked the psyche at a biological level. Will and conviction were shut down, replaced by a pure survival reflex. This panic is like the sharp intake of breath when you misstep on a staircase. Your mind knows you are fine, but your body has already hit the alarm button. Why did the Church, which formally forbade the shedding of blood, consider this procedure light? The answer lies in the legal formula, sine effusione sanguinis, without the shedding of blood. The torture left no open wounds, and for the record, the victim remained unharmed. This was the height of hypocrisy. During a single session, a victim was forced to ingest 6 to 8 liters of water, more than the entire volume of blood in an adult man's body. This led to stomach ruptures, pulmonary edema, and acute heart failure. The records scrupulously noted that no blood was shed, while ignoring the convulsions. The letter of the law became a shield for sadism. But the inquisitors used this borderline state for an even more cynical purpose. How could a woman, certain of her innocence, an hour later, recall the names of other witches? The process was cyclical. Water was poured until the victim began to suffocate. The torture was stopped, she was allowed a breath, and a leading question was asked. Silence led to immediate repetition. In the brief intervals, with consciousness muddled, the inquisitor would not ask but assert, "Your neighbor Anna was there, wasn't she?" The tormented brain, seeking to avoid suffocation at any cost, clung to these prompts. The confession was not extracted, but constructed. The victim herself would often begin to add fabricated details to make her denunciation more convincing and end the agony. We have examined the witch's chair, the Spanish boot, and water torture. It seems the arsenal of physical pain was comprehensive. But what if you could make a person confess to the most terrible crimes before a torture instrument ever touched them? What if the fear of pain was more effective than the pain itself? The Inquisition's main weapon was not iron or water, but the atmosphere of total terror it created. Now we will expose this invisible arsenal, a weapon that cannot be seen in a museum, but which destroyed the personality with certainty, isolation, false promises, and fear itself as a technology of power. How do you make a woman incriminate herself and her loved ones without a single physical touch? The system, known for its cruelty, often achieved its goal before it was even applied. The first element of psychological arsenal. Number 6, isolation. The accused was immediately placed in a solitary, dark cell, deprived of contact with her family. Her sense of time was disrupted, blurring the line between day and night. In a sensory void, the brain loses its connection to reality. The inquisitor became the only bridge to the outside world, the sole source of information. A mind deprived of stimuli is like water on a flat surface. At first, it wanders, but the inquisitor's voice carves the first channel. Soon, all thoughts flow only along this path. Interrogations began weeks later when the victim was already exhausted. This is precisely why the inquisitor's next step was so diabolically effective. What made the accused sign confessions that led them straight to the stake? After weeks of isolation, the inquisitor changed tactics. He spoke sympathetically. He offered an easy way out. He promised leniency, the substitution of burning with penance in exchange for a full confession. This was a lie. According to the laws of the Inquisition itself, any confession of witchcraft automatically meant a death sentence. The promised leniency was a cynical trick. At best, the victim was first strangled, and only then was her body burned. This mercy of strangulation was considered a great privilege. This tactic used hope against the victim herself. Believing the deception, she signed her own death warrant. But there was one document that gave theological and legal justification to this entire system of lies. The accused is brought to the torture chamber. She is shown the Spanish boot. The executioner monotonously describes what each instrument will do to her body, but does not touch her. Why does she start talking after half an hour? This was an official procedure. Torture by fear. Legally, it was not considered torture. For the brain, a vividly imagined threat is as traumatic as the real thing. The imagination, spurred by weeks of fear, painted pictures of agony, more horrific than the torture itself, the smell of dampness and rusted iron, the creak of the executioner's boots on the stone floor, the glint of spikes in the light of a single candle. It was a theater designed for a single broken audience member. The inquisitors turned imagination into their executioner. If the victim confessed at this stage, a note was made in the record. Confession obtained voluntarily, without the use of torture. But what gave them the right to do all this? What book turned cruelty into a virtue. We have dissected the invisible arsenal. Isolation destroyed reality. False promises killed hope. Fear broke the will even before physical pain. But this arsenal does not explain the scale. Up to 80% of all accused were women. This is no accident. It points to a targeted terror. What was the catalyst that focused all this cruelty specifically on women and turned isolated trials into a pan-European epidemic? It was a book, a treatise that became the legal and theological license to kill, a manual that legalized hatred for hundreds of years. We have reached the very heart of darkness. In the next part, we will dissect the operating system of the entire Inquisition machine. We will analyze the book that became a codex of hatred, the Hammer of Witches. This text, the Hammer of Witches, was not the first. It was just one of dozens of demonological treatises, but its impact was staggering. In the 30 years after its publication in 1487, it was reprinted 13 times, a circulation second only to the Bible. Its central thesis was simple: woman is by nature flawed. The authors proved this with pseudo-etymology. The word femina, woman, derives from phi and minus, meaning lesser faith. This made her the perfect vessel for the devil. The book turned everyday misogyny into legal doctrine, asserting that even a single witch could destroy an entire village. But the most terrifying part was how it changed the rules of the judicial process itself, turning it into a conveyor belt of death. What made it the deadliest document of its era? Its structure. The first two parts looked like an academic work, proving the reality of witchcraft. But the third part was not theory, but a detailed legal instruction manual for judges. How to ask leading questions, how to interpret silence as a confession, how to legally apply torture repeatedly, and most importantly, how to deceive the accused by promising her life in exchange for a denunciation. This text worked like a sieve, but in reverse. It was designed to filter out any evidence of innocence, leaving in the judge's hands only confirmation of guilt. It absolved the inquisitors of all responsibility, declaring that ordinary laws did not apply to witches. This was a declaration of total war. But who were the men who wrote this codex of hatred? Its authors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, were Dominican inquisitors, empowered by the Pope himself. But behind this facade lies a nuance that changes everything. The main author, Kramer, was a fanatical failure. In 1485, in Innsbruck, the local bishop halted his trial, calling Kramer himself an old fool, obsessed with sexual fantasies. The Hammer of Witches became his personal revenge against the ecclesiastical system. One of the bloodiest chapters in history was written not because of theology, but because of the personal complexes and lust for power of one man. The co-authorship of the respected Sprenger was added for authority. The machine of genocide was launched on the fuel of personal resentment. We have dissected this machine. The Hammer of Witches created the image of the enemy. Isolation and fear broke the will. The instruments of torture completed the process. It seems its era has passed. But which of these tools, the systematic dehumanization of a group, the use of fear for control, the justification of cruelty for a higher purpose, do we see in the propaganda and political repressions of the 21st century? The Inquisition machine was a technology of power. In the finale, we will prove that the Inquisition did not die. It merely changed its mask. Its blueprints still lie on the desks of those who build new systems of oppression. The machine of terror was not assembled in the torture chamber. Its launch began in the mind. The first element was ideology, the Hammer of Witches. It answered the main question: who is the enemy? And the enemy was designated as woman. After that, the enemy had to be stripped of their humanity in the eyes of society. For this, the second instrument was deployed, public humiliation through the masks of shame. This was the first demonstrative blow. Once the victim was socially isolated, psychological weapons came into play. She was placed in an invisible cage of total sensory deprivation. This third step broke her connection with reality and prepared her for confession. At this stage, her body had not yet been touched, but her spirit was already broken. And only now, when the victim was ideologically condemned, publicly humiliated, and psychologically crushed, did the technology of pain come into action. This process was not senseless cruelty. It was a calibrated, technological conveyor belt. The fourth element was prolonged, exhausting agony. The witch's chair was an instrument for obtaining complex fabricated confessions and denunciations when the victim was ready to do anything just to end the torment. The fifth element, sharp, bone-breaking pain. The Spanish boot and the Judas cradle worked like surgical instruments for quickly crushing the will and obtaining a simple yes to any of the investigator's questions. The sixth element, the technology of panic-inducing terror. Water torture was the pinnacle of manipulation, a tool for implanting false memories. The inquisitors were not seeking the truth. They were creating it, using the victim's own survival instinct against her. But this conveyor belt served not only to obtain confessions, it had another more important purpose. The final seventh element of the system. Instruments like the Pear of Anguish were used not for interrogation, but for a public spectacle of punishment. Their goal was not to extract information, but to teach a lesson to everyone else by punishing incorrect behavior. Thus, the Inquisition was not just a series of judicial errors, it was a deliberate technology of total social control. Its main product was not confessions, but fear. A fear that kept entire generations in submission. Cruelty was not a side effect, but the main instrument and language of the system. Every pyre was not an act of justice, but an act of propaganda, asserting absolute power. This fear machine operated at full capacity for nearly 300 years, suppressing dissent for at least 12 generations. And this brings us to the main and final question. What was the fuel for this machine of terror? Now that we see the entire system, this question is for you. What was the true engine of this machine? Was it the sincere yet monstrously distorted faith of the inquisitors in their divine mission, their conviction that they were saving souls by burning evil out of the world? Or was it, at its core, a cold, cynical thirst for power and total control over society? Was religion just a convenient smokescreen, and the witch hunts an effective tool for eliminating dissenters and reinforcing the patriarchal order? We want to know your opinion. Write just one word in the comments that you think best explains what happened. Faith or power? Let's see what the majority believes was more prevalent in this dark chapter of history. Your vote will determine the final verdict.